Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Teen Hungry Like the Wolf. Season 1, episodes 11 and 12. So, after a while of me reviewing a show, I eventually tried to figure out some way to come up with some alternate way of saying it, of the title, because eventually, it just starts to wear down. Especially if it's a fairly a long season. If it's like a show that eventually just has like 8 episodes or 6 episodes to it, I don't come up with a name for that just because it's like meh, it's it's just whatever show. So going into Teen Hungry Like the Wolf, uh, really an interesting way to just kind of end this season. But here's the one problem that I have. So every single time that you're to end a show, there's always to be this one specific event that is to tie to the ending of a show, which is to normally be, in quite possibly this scenario, a dance, which kind of ends the show with it mostly being in episode 11, and then they have to do the big oh well, what's gonna happen to the alpha in episode 12? I'm complexed. What could happen with an alpha? Yeah, so episode 11 is the dance episode where it seems that Scott was to, of course, take Allison to this dance, and then for some reason or another that I'll talk about in spoilers, he eventually cannot take Allison to dance. Coincidentally, I wonder why. But anyways, so within I wonder why, even though I know the answer. Anyways, so going into this and wrapping this up, and I apologize that I've kind of waited a couple days to get to this too, but eventually, if anybody is to eventually find these Teen Wolf Hungry Like the Wolf episodes of me reviewing this, it won't matter. But anyways, thank everyone for watching these reviews, especially hearing what I have to say every single time I talk about these. But yeah, this show is actually really fun. Yeah, there's some times where I just need a stretch of time to just kind of been man, okay, I've been doing these a lot. Let's kind of take a break. But yeah, but I've been enjoying them. There's some fun spots here. And eventually we also have the whole creaking of the door thing in this episode also that always happens in horror movies where you're trying to absolutely be the quietest person you can possibly be, especially if you're a person that is trying to sneak into a home late at night. All of a sudden there's 50 billion things that all that's always bound to happen. You have the Dane Cook joke where he mentions that he was to cheat on his girlfriend, and while he was to sneak back into the house, all of a sudden every part of his house was creaking and squeaking that night, where he's cheater, liar. And Dane's shut up, house, I'm trying to get back to the home, shut up. And it's cheater, liar. Of course, there's a stand-up moment where Dane Cook talks about that. But big ups to Dane Cook. Freaking awesome stand-up. I enjoy his stuff. So, let's go into this. So, teeing up of Teen Hungry Like the Wolf. So, in episode 11, they of course have to go in the classic way of trying to wrap up a show with a dance. Where, Scott trying to go to the dance because he feels like he has to. Something's going down with Lydia in this episode, much more so than her quite possibly having an OC moment, which means if people were to watch the show OC, I've seen it, I've enjoyed the show, don't be at me. I enjoy the OC. I enjoy it. It's great. I'll get back to it eventually and review that show because I enjoy it. Maybe after this show is over, I'll go back and watch the OC. It seems like Teen Wolf, people love Teen Wolf, so eventually I'll go back to the OC probably. Anyways, so we have this like Seth and Summer kind of moment going on with Lydia and Styles here, where Styles is trying to establish dominance, and Lydia is just like, really, Styles? You're to just like cement that, like, oh yeah, you, me, now dance, and Lydia's like, I'm not falling for that. Like I'm like, no, just no. But yeah, um, so eventually Lydia ends up having a big, giant, massive mistake that is to cost her, and eventually we're like towards the end of this season trying to figure out what's going up or what's going on with Lydia. Uh, we also seem to, of course, in the very last episode, we got to do something with that alpha guy, right? Like we gotta figure out how to just like kind of let him just be a thing that goes away. Uh, but yeah, so we also are to have Sheriff Noah seemingly eventually figure out who had started the fire. Because we're Billy Joel. Who started the fire? We're going to figure that out towards the end of this episode. And we're going to wrap it all up in a nice, neat little bow. So one thing that I guess I do have to clear up, where the heck was Derek? So evidently Derek was to be tied up into his own home somewhere in the darkened, deepened dungeon, whatever part of his home, where I guess that makes a lot of sense because like werewolves has to be chained up anyways, and why wouldn't they be chained up in their own home? Because that would make a lot of sense. So yeah, I like, how is it that everyone was like, hey, like no one cared where Derek was this whole entire time? Man, is that kind of sad. No one really gave a crap where Derek was, but then obviously Derek was still at his own place. Anybody anybody have a problem with that? So yeah, so no one went to look for Derek because no one cared. No one even said like, hey, where is Derek? Where is that guy who eventually plays Superman and Superman and Lois? If he dies, whatever. But then eventually, it seems because no one cared for Derek, then eventually towards the very tail end of this episode, all of a sudden, Derek is to be given a promotion, let's just say, for all of his hard work of no one caring about him. No one really cared about him, so he gets promoted. So, with that said, I've talked about this episode fairly cryptically, and so we also have Melissa McCall, who's Scott's mother, if I haven't messed that up enough. We have Melissa that is pining away for Peter Hall, or Peter Hale, just calling him, and it's just like, hey, if you want to just call me back to just, just hang out or whatever. Oh, Melissa. She's so lonely. I would understand that too. Especially if it's all that matters is just like going to work and just working your butt off just to eventually just be like, I'm always alone. With the exception of my son, where I have to kind of like butt in his life consistently. But hey, freaking, like, if you have nothing better to do, I'm just waiting for Melissa to just like, you know what, I really just want like a mother and son day where we just kind of like, I'm just waiting for that to happen. Where like, since Melissa is just kind of like, she's kind of just like, all that matters is she's consistently going to work. And there's no other story with her but her just consistently going to work. Like, come on, writers. Give Melissa something to do. She's just a character that vanishes. But we also have Dr. Allen, who is to really just cement numerous times over that this establishment of which that he is working in is definitely not open for business. where it's like somebody chucks a chair and Dr. Allen is like, you know what? Let me spell it out to you. CLOSED. Do you speak English? Because we are closed. We are not the open for business. And so, anyways, so yeah, like come back in normal business hours because we are this thing called closed. So yeah, so going into this episode, let's tee it up. It's about that coveted time to go in this customary thing called spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again. Let's get into camera frame to spoil this episode. So this episode is to be focused on this thing called, dance. So Coach Bobby is to tell Scott that unfortunately, Scott is not academically inclined, which means like Scott is doing crappy in school, so he cannot go to said dance. Because that's just stopped everyone before, where it's just like, oh yeah, so like I've already paid for the tickets. I already bought like a tux, and you're telling me that I can't go to this? Like, so are you guys gonna refund me for all the money that I spent upon this ticket for all of this? No? Well, someone's getting sued. No. Anyways, so Coach Bobby is to tell Scott that he can make it to the dance, and Scott's like, well, I'm gonna go anyways. I'm gonna go stag. And because Peter Hale had told Scott that, well, you know what I'm going to come for? I'm going to come for all of your friends because you can't be everywhere. And so now Scott is immediately thinking, well, Peter is probably going to come after Allison because Scott has things of usernames and passwords that just says Allison on it, weirdly and bizarrely. That was so weird. So, because we have this whole moment where Styles and Peter are to get together to trace this cell phone where Styles knows the password of Scott's cell phone. I'm assuming it's Scott's cell phone or it's Scott's laptop. Anyways, but yeah, both the username and the password are both Allison, and it's like, okay, that's such a goofy. Why do they have to do the whole cracking of the passcode thing? But then after Styles was to help Peter, Peter was to say, it's like, well, hey, would you like a bite? Would you like a bite of me biting you? And Styles is like, no, I don't want a bite. And like Peter is just like, you know what, you're lying. Like I can tell. It's like your heart is saying yes, but your body is saying no because your mouth is moving. Anyways, yeah, they had that weird, and I know that happens in episode 12, but let's harpender back. So Scott is to eventually just say to Jackson, hey, well, how about you go on to just take out Allison to the dance and just weirdly just tell her that you're going to be just friends going to this dance also, because I'm going to turn into the werewolf again and scare you, because that's what I'm going to do. So Jackson goes off to tell Allison, like, hey, let's go to the dance together as friends, because if not before when I was eating my apple and telling Scott that I was going to get with his lady and just and I was going to establish dominance, not anymore. Like now Scott or Jackson, who is really just now just afraid of werewolves, even though he desperately wants to get bitten by them. So, is he afraid that he's going to be killed by Scott or Derek or whoever? A little confused, because here's my thing. Wouldn't Jackson just be like, well, I'm not going to do what you want me to do because where is the bite? Where is me turning into a werewolf because I want that to happen? But Scott cemented before that the only person that can supposedly bite a person, I guess, is the alpha. So, yeah, I guess if Jackson was to eventually just get hurt by Scott, then he wouldn't turn into anything. He would just be a guy that has a wound that has to eventually, yeah, anyways, pushing on. So, Jackson goes off to the date with Allison, and really it's kind of like uh like Jackson like turns into an a-hole like during this dance where he's just like drinking the whole time because he's like, well, great, like I have to go with Allison, and I'm not gonna get any I'm not gonna get anything out of this. Man, does that suck. So I'm going with this girl, but like now like I don't have my biting apple situation where like I get to do anything because we have to go as just friends now. So we also have this moment where Allison is to go on and get her dresses for the dance. And so Lydia is talking about like frowns and how somebody can trip on it or something like that. And like you should smile because there might be somebody that loves you or whatever goofy thing that Lydia is saying in this episode. Uh, it's weird. Anyways, so we have both Lydia and Allison who are going up this escalator. And I don't know, for some reason, for me, especially in these episodes, like this seems so much like the OC, it's ridiculous. So Allison is basically telling Lydia, well, hey, guess what? You're going to go off and you're going to go and date Styles and go out to this dance because I told you so. Because I guess Lydia doesn't exactly have like a bajillion people wanting to go and take her out to this dance. And you would have thought that Lydia would have had that because it seems like she has a huge, massive amount of friends, right? AKA Allison. And that's it. Anyways, so Styles is all of a sudden, like, I think trying perfume on and, like, spraying himself with perfume, and he's like, so Lydia is just like, I'm going out with that guy. I'm gonna have to go to the dance with that guy. Really? All right. So Lydia and Styles are forced to go to this dance together, and then eventually Styles is to force Lydia to dance with him. And that's the moment where Styles actually gets this thing called a backbone and is mentioned like, hey, I've loved you ever since like the third grade, and like we're going to dance. And Lydia's like, no. Like, because that's Lydia. She's straight up just like, no. Like that kind of person. So and really just we have like the complaining and the arduous processes and all that kinds of stuff. So anyways, we have Scott who is now having to go and figure out what kind of dress that he's going to wear for this dance because he's going regardless. He's going on rooftops trying to eventually get into this dance, somehow sneak inside whatever weird thing that he has to pull off weirdly to get into this dance. So Scott is to have uh, like this suit and tie thing be made, and all of a sudden like Melissa is kind of his mother is kind of looking at him like, hey, like it seems like you have a wardrobe malfunction there. So all of a sudden Melissa has to kind of sew Scott's like pants while also having that like Peter Parker Aunt May kind of moment. No offense to Melissa, because she's the Aunt May of this situation. where, like, remember in the spot where Peter Parker was to go to Aunt May in the hospital, and like Aunt May was to mention that that Mary Jane was like an angel to Peter Parker, and that maybe it's time for Peter to tell MJ how he feels because everyone else knows. Like, we have this same kind of talk here between both Scott and Melissa, where Melissa is just telling Scott, it's like, well, like, you really need to tell Allison how you feel. Like, you need to sing songs about it. You need to dance about it. You need to just, like, tell her how you feel. Like, create poems about it. Like, send out a tweet saying that how you feel. Like, do all of that stuff all in one fell swoop motion because you need to tell her because she doesn't know. Send out an airplane that has a like a sign in the back of it saying Allison Hart Scott for whatever reason, and this joke has gone on for far too long. That's what he should tell her in an airplane. Just send it out. So so Melissa is telling Scott that that he needs to tell Allison how he feels. So we go to the dance, and I'm hoping that I've kind of covered. Peter was bizarrely picking out dresses for Allison at this mall as if he has just become this fashion expert for whatever reason. And also, Peter mentions that Allison has pale skin. What kind of an a-hole just tell... Peter, how could you? How could you say that Allison has pale skin? I'm sorry that we're not in the OC and everybody is, like, tanned up to the yin-yang, with the exclusion of some certain characters that were in the OC show that didn't get tanned because they're like, I'm not going to get tan. Are you kidding me? Like, here's also the goofy thing. So, Seth on that show, he is supposedly this guy who is to consistently have this boat being outside. And he's like a boat wrangler. He's a boat guy. And he's not that tan. Is anybody confused about that? I sure as heck am. Why is the guy who has boats, who is Seth, not really all that tan? Does he spend way too much time reading comic books? I don't know. Anyways, figuring that out later. I don't know why I'm talking about the OC fair too often in this, because I think we're wrapping this season up anyways. So, and there's not a whole hefty amount going on, because dance in this 11th episode. So bizarrely, Peter is picking on a dress for Allison, which I'm like, what kind of bizarre alternate world is this? Where we just have some random guy. Well, I guess, like, when really looking at it, there's a lot of times where you need the opposite gender opinion upon things to help you kind of figure out, like, oh, what will look good? Like, I've had some times where I've been stopped at a store where all of a sudden, like, a woman will want, like, my opinion about, like, some clothes for her relative or whatever. I'm just like, yeah, I think that looks cool. Like, I think, yeah, that'll work. Yeah, why? Anyways, so pushing on. So, everybody makes it off to the dance, and so we have Derek, who is still chained up, and we didn't even cover all the Allison stuff in the very beginning of this episode. So, and I'll get to that now. So, Allison is to find out about Derek being a werewolf, and she still hasn't figured out yet that Derek is also Superman in an alternate world. That secret will just blow her mind to where she's just going to drive off even faster into a construction road that should have only been going 25 miles an hour, and she went 75. So, weirdly, here's the thing. So Allison is to find out that Derek or just werewolves exist. And so Allison goes off to go into her car and just continues to just drive away. Just very saddened and not really thinking of like, oh my god, this is my life now. You would have thought that she would have just been like, oh my god, werewolves exist? Isn't this sweet? like this is cool. Werewolves exist. That's great. But no, like she takes the opposite, like where she's just like, oh my god, my family hunts werewolves for a living, and I'm just gonna drive and get the heck out of here. I don't know, I'm just gonna drive somewhere. And so all of a sudden, Sheriff Noah pulls her over, and all of a sudden she's like crying. She's like, like, please, Sheriff Noah, write me the ticket. Like, please, like, I don't want to seem like I'm trying to cry my way out of this ticket. Oh, please, Sheriff Noah. Remember the time when you were in Mortal Kombat and you were so cool? And Sheriff Noah's like, yeah, I was cool. Do I have to write you the ticket? like, Sheriff Noah is trying to like be nice, and he's trying to let Allison off with this warning. But Allison is like, no, write me the ticket, sir. Please write me the ticket. And like Sheriff Noah is just like, you know what? Like, yeah, like you went like 75 and a 25 because it's a construction zone and like all this and that. And but like, hey, I'll let you off. Weirdly, bizarrely. So, so after that moment, we still like we seemingly have Allison that is after that whole moment happens, it seems like she is back to normal because of I guess Jackson like offering her to go out to the dance together. So like I guess Allison just need that shake it off Taylor Swift moment to eventually just be like, oh okay, like I guess like everything doesn't seem too bad, right? Because I have almost two guys just like coming after me one way or the other. Because one could be a werewolf, maybe. Anyways, so pushing on. So Kate is to have or Allison is to tell Kate before she goes and drives off. It's like, why didn't my family ever tell me about this? And Kate was just like, well, we were going to. Yeah, I'm sure you're going to take your freaking sweet, sweet time to tell her that, hey, yeah, there could be these werewolves out. They're going to kill you, and they're probably in your high school. Yeah, like, we're not going to tell you any of that. Hopefully you don't die any night or day that you are out just driving 75 miles an hour in a 25. But hey, like that's the risk that you take when you just when you're with this family that doesn't bother to train you from the womb about defending yourself from werewolves. That's the problem. That's the biggest problem that I have about this whole thing is anybody that would be involved in a werewolf, vampire, whatever hunting family, they would be training this person from out of the womb and just to like really like know what they're dealing with or whatever. They wouldn't wait till they're like 18 or 95 and then tell them the secret because one, this person who is to tell said secret is to probably die at any moment in time. But also, probably also we have shows like Grimm where it takes some relative of the actual guy who becomes the Grimm to die for this guy to know that there's a whole world out there that he didn't realize existed until somebody vogues in front of his face and he's like, oh yeah, weird things are happening. So I guess I can see both realms of it where it's like train this person out of the womb or just wait till it's the worst possible time for them to be seeing some crazy crap to then tell them the truth. Whatever. So let's push on to this dance because I think that we have covered a bulk of everything. So now we get to the dance, and so Scott now has to figure out how he can mingle his way of having Coach Bob not have to throw him out of this dance, because Coach Bob was to tell Scott that he was going to basically kick Scott out of this dance himself if he sees him there, because Coach Bob was like, well, like, I can't have you kicked off the team, so the alternative is you not going to the dance. Which, I'm sorry, like, I know there would be a lot of people that just like, oh no, I'm off, I can't go to the dance. Who cares? Like, I can go to a freaking nightclub. What is the difference? Well, I guess, especially if you're not old enough, I guess, to go to certain nightclubs because alcohol is to be had, or you can only stay till certain times of the day. Whatever. I know I'm ranting here. So we go to the dance, and so what ends up happening is Scott is trying to avoid getting kicked out of this dance because he's to watch Jackson, Lydia, Styles, all of his friends like Hawks, because eventually Peter is going to approach them and try to kill them off. I'm like, why wouldn't Peter go after Melissa during this perfect time then? Just my thought process. Like, I guess that ship has sailed, so Peter is just like, well, I guess not. Let's go after any one of just Scott's friends. Let's not pull the whole Dexter thing while Scott is to be at this dance, and like Scott is just like, well, hey, like, how is it that Peter isn't attacking all my friends? And then he ends up going home to find out that his mother has been bitten. And then it's like, oh no, that was the one person that I should have been watching over this whole entire time. No. Oh well. It happens. So Scott goes to this dance and eventually is to grab Danny, who is to be quite possibly a guy that is gay. We don't know. We didn't clearly blurt this out. So Scott is all of a sudden dancing with Danny, who I believe is still Danny. I could be wrong about this. So all of a sudden, Coach Bobby is to see Scott and Danny dancing together. And we consistently have Coach Bob saying, like, you can't be here, Scott, you can't be here. And then all of a sudden, like, both of the guys are dancing together. And Scott is like, what, Coach Bobby? Like, what? And so Coach Bobby's to realize maybe there would be some people that thought the wrong way about why Coach Bobby was telling Scott to not be here. So Coach Bob just kind of like just walks off to just be like, oh my God, like, hopefully nobody thought that I was trying to be insensitive about whatever, that I didn't feel like someone didn't belong here, so to speak. Yikes. So Coach Bob walks off, and then Scott is like, hey, Danny, I owe you one. When is that owing one gonna happen? Probably never, because this person will probably get replaced probably in the next season, right? Or if he does come back, which I hope he does, hopefully there's be something interesting going on with this character, because they've used him fairly often. I hope he gets his own story for whatever reason, because it's probably about time now, right? Like, a lot of people are probably going to die by this show. So anyways, pushing on. So what ends up happening is we start to have people that are to just start to F off from this dance. And so eventually Scott is to see Allison, and so Scott and Allison has this dance. Jackson ends up effing off into the forest to eventually be found by the Argents, where Chris Argent is like, yeah, like, thanks for letting us know, Derek, that it seems like you are some part of this werewolf family, but you aren't an actual werewolf. Now, like, we can use you to figure out who these people are. Or otherwise, we're just going to shoot you in this parking lot and you're just going to easily die because you're human. So Jackson blurbs to Chris that Scott is a werewolf. And so now, like, Chris is to know that Scott is definitely one of the werewolves. So now we have Styles and Lydia who end up effing off to go eventually to this, I think, like football field or lacrosse field or something. And so it ends up happening that we have Peter who ends up biting Lydia. And I'm like, yeah, like, so that's where we eventually have Lydia eventually having some weird something going on with her. Because I remember there was some episode where they just find Lydia in the like forest somewhere and they're trying to figure out what all had happened to her. And so like I remember that episode, but like I didn't know like the context of how that came about. Now I guess we do. So Lydia has been bitten by the alpha, and so that's when Peter grabs Styles and is to now want to know information about both Scott and where Derek are. And so we have all that. So Lydia is to eventually be grabbed by Jackson, and Jackson rushes her off to the hospital where Sheriff Noah's like, hey, what happened to this girl? And Jackson's like, I don't know, I just found her. And so Sheriff Noah's like, well, I'm from Mortal Kombat and I just won't accept that answer. And Jackson is like, well, good for you, because I'm from Arrow. I was the Red Hood, or the Red Arrow for a while. And I I'm having fun. I'm joking around. It's jokes. Anyways, uh, do these people only do like Arrow and Mortal Kombat to you? No, but it's a joke that I'm consistently running with within these episodes. I'm sure the guy who played Derek didn't just do Superman, and that's all he's ever done. But I'm having jokes with it because it's funny to me. Anyways, so like I could say that the guy that plays Scott McCall, I think he was in Yoga Hosers. I think was he? Yeah, I think he was. Go ahead and check out Yoga Hosers, and you can just say if I was correct or incorrect. It was a Kevin Smith film. It was kind of goofy, kind of funny, had some yoga in it. Anyways, Justin Long was also in that movie. Anyways, pushing on. So, uh, so Jackson was to say that Styles was with Lydia and they had left together. And so Sheriff Noah's like, is my son a werewolf? Is he? Could he be the guy with the nails and the hair? Could he be? I'm not quite sure. So eventually Styles is to show up at this place after kind of giving Peter the information that that he is to tell him about where Scott and or Derek are to be, whichever. Anyways, so uh, Sheriff Noah is to ask like Styles about like what had happened, and Styles wasn't really sure, and so it's like like Sheriff Noah is just like, man, I'm just not good at my job. Like, man, isn't that sad? Freaking like when you have just a sheriff that just feels like he's just not getting like the best that he can do. Like eventually that he'll probably just be like, man, I'm just not good at my job. Maybe I'll just like resign or whatever because maybe somebody else is going to be better. I don't know. But let's keep Sheriff Noah into the thing. You know what I'm saying? Let's keep him as sheriff. Freaking anyways. But yeah, so like, and there's a whole spot where Sheriff Noah and Styles are like, Sheriff Noah is to have this phone call to try to confirm things, but it also seems that we eventually find out that Kate was actually the culprit of setting Derek's house on fire. So I'm like, okay, this is cool. So we actually figure out who that is. Because also, we have Kate talking to Derek in his in him being chained up because Derek is to be tortured by some extra guy that Kate is to have lying around that is to continue to punch Derek, but then decide, well, you know what, my hands are just kind of getting a little like hurt, so I'm just gonna use a baseball bat upon your face. And but yeah, so Kate is to admit that she was the person who ended up starting the fire when she was talking to Derek. And so it's like, okay, this is interesting. So we finally get to know who are all the people that started the fire. I wish that we would have gotten a clear cut scene of why that all happened, but time constraints. Like, I wish that there would have been a clear cut scene of why they did what they did, but still, like, I guess that really doesn't matter because the ends justify the means, right? Where it's just like, we'll just say that these people started this fire. And Chris is kind of upset that Kate is to eventually have started this fire because there was no real proof that any of these werewolves had ever really spilt innocent blood that day. So why did these people all had to have their house burnt down when it seems like they were trying to be a normal person within this community? That not everyone was just to, especially werewolves, go out there and kill people. And especially we had the Alpha who had this sigil sign or whatever of revenge from his house getting burnt down and numerous people of his family getting killed and what have you. Plus him being tortured by having his face being half burnt off, that he had to just hold that half burnt face image for X amount of time. So now we're getting into the end game, the end of the series, or the end of the series, the end of the season. I mean, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves if we say series. So, how does the last episode play out? Well, Scott is to eventually come and save Derek from him being chained up because Scott is to howl out into the ether of things to all of a sudden have Derek howl out to the ether of things. And so now Scott knows where Derek is. So this is just like Superman and Lois, where Superman was to shout out, Jordan! And Jordan was to shout out, Dad! And, like, or Superman, or whatever he shouted out in that show. So, like, this is just like Superman and Lois all over again. I always have to have some weird comparison to that show at some point in time because it's honest. Like, freaking you have the howl of Scott and you have the howl of Derek, Jordan, whatever. It's same thing. Anyways, so Scott finds where Derek is, and he is where he's been all along at his own freaking house. You couldn't have checked his own freaking house? Am I just dumb here? You couldn't have figured out that he's at his own home. Was there a secret passageway to get into this? Unbelievable. So, Derek ends up getting free, and so everybody is just outside of Derek's home. All of a sudden, we have both Kate and we have Allison, who are all of a sudden to spot both Scott and Derek. And so Allison is starting to fire arrows into Derek, like shooting him in like the shoulder, I think, and then shooting him in the leg, just dropping him down. And so here's the thing. So, like, they didn't have arrows like before that really were just to, like, bog down Derek. I guess not. They just have normal arrows for this situation, right? So Scott is to be taken down, but then he ends up just kind of breaking off the arrows and like pulling them out of his body. And so both Derek and Scott are to run off to just get closer to his home. Okay. So Kate is to just kind of really just tell Allison that, hey, like, there's like a side that you need to choose now. Like, it's either like you need to start killing these guys because it's the right thing to do. And so now we have Kate who ends up firing a bullet into Derek, which we naturally assumed that Derek would have been dead at this point in time, right? That Derek would have been shot, Kate would have killed Derek, but I guess not? So Kate shot Derek but didn't shoot him to kill him. How dumb is that? And then Kate is to eventually pull a gun on Scott and just be like, well, like, choose the form of your destructor, Allison. Like, because these guys have to die, and I didn't even shoot the one other one, but hey, like, we just got to shoot these werewolves and kill them off. Like, hence why, like, I tried to get rid of them before in this town, but didn't work out. So all of a sudden, Chris is to magically deliciously appear and just be like, hey, like, you gotta stop all this because, like, you're killing werewolves that there's no right reason for you to go ahead and do this. And, like, Chris is to eventually also know that, like, Kate was a part of that whole burning of the house, that arson. So, like, now there is a knowing of that. There is a knowledge of that for Chris. Because really just everyone is to know this by now. Like, Stiles is to basically just either tell everybody or people are to just figure things out. And plus also, like, Kate is boasting at this point now that she was like, ha 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 ha, like, I burned all these werewolves, even though there was no justifiably right reason to. So, Chris is now pulling a gun on Kate, and so really there's just this kind of fork in the road between this brother and this sister moment where all of a sudden we have Peter, who is now the alpha, who finally arrives because evidently Peter is taking his sweet batucas of time to just appear while his werewolves are getting arrows in the frickin' body and bullets in the chest and whatever. Because here's the thing, Peter was to mention that he needed both Derek and Scott to eventually help him. Like, he can't do everything by himself. That's what he was talking with Stiles about, is that he needs both Derek and Scott, because Stiles was to mention to Peter, it's like, well, do whatever you do, but, like, if I help you, you need to leave Scott alone. And Peter is just like, well, I need both Scott, and I need both Derek. I don't know why Peter now sounds like this, but that's kind of what he sounded like in this show, in all brutal honesty. Anyways, so the Alpha comes, and we now have this fight out moment where Peter is to grab Kate and drag her into the home by her throat, and so Allison is to come in there, and so Peter is to mention that he wants a true apology about what had all happened here in this home, and Kate was just like, I'm sorry, and Peter was like, well, I don't buy that. Because, of course, Peter can, of course, hear a heartbeat and, of course, hear whatever, so he can tell whether a person is lying or not. So we just have Peter, who ends up just ripping out Kate's throat and dropping her, which you can never confirm or deny on this show whether a person is dead until they actually bury said person. So, I don't know, maybe eventually Kate, from some magic amulet or something, will eventually come back, because why would they kill anybody off in the show? Derek has been dead, what, like 12 times by now? Anyways, so, no one is really dead. No one is really and truly dead. Maybe Peter is not really dead, eventually, once we head into the end of this episode, because spoilers, the alpha ends up getting killed, and then there's a new alpha being obtained by we'll get to that. So all of a sudden, Scott is to appear and tell Allison to run off so she can be protected, because every single thing that Scott is to do is to try and protect Allison, eventually even keeping his secret of being a werewolf from her. But he went to the dance and told her that he loved her, and then eventually towards the end of this episode, Allison is to tell Scott that she loves him, and that, like, but there's always that, like, reason of, like, well, I wanted to protect you. Oh, and I completely forgot about the whole bus thing. We'll get to that now. Before, like, we finish off with the alpha. So both Scott and Allison are to eventually head within these buses, and I'm getting flashbacks of when Scott and Allison were going to get hot and heavy in some bus in some dream sequence that Scott had, and then supposedly Scott was to imagine that he was to kill Allison in his dream, but eventually someone else had gotten murdered in this bus. Like, I had flashbacks of that. So all of a sudden, Allison is to try to get into one of these buses, and all of a sudden, these two cars, one with them being Chris in them, and the other being with some other Argent guy. All of a sudden, like, we have Scott who's kind of pinned between these cars and this bus, and so all of a sudden, like, these Argent guys go and drive these cars through to try to hit Scott, but Scott jumps and transforms into werewolf, to all of a sudden now show forcibly to Allison that Scott is indeed the teen wolf, werewolf person, hungry like the wolf, whichever. So now, like, Chris is to have to tell his daughter Allison, like, hey, like, I'm sorry, like, I had to wait too long to tell you all this. But yeah, it seems like there are people here that are werewolves. But Allison already knew because of getting revealed Derek being a werewolf. So, and I completely missed about that, and that was a key important part of the episode, of the 11th episode, but now I'm going to talk about it now. So, now let's talk about the fighting out of the alpha, where we consistently have the alpha either being normal Petered face, or eventually changing consistently between werewolf and Peter, which I'm like, okay, why do they have to consistently do that? Because I guess, like, they wanted to keep the actor there and keep this fighting sequence and not have to spend too much budget, I guess, on CGI, with having a full-on alpha werewolf fighting both Scott and Derek. But anyways, pushing on. So eventually we have Derek and Scott, because Derek is still not dead for whatever reason, because he's been killed 85 times by now in this show. Does the number continue to increase every time I talk about how many times Derek has been dead on the show? Probably. Anyways, it probably will happen. So eventually the alpha, after consistently trying to fight off both these werewolves, eventually just changes into the alpha, and so they kind of head out with this battle outside, so that way Allison can get some arrows eventually into the alpha. And also, coincidentally, we have both Jackson and Styles arrive with the right concoction of things to flame up the alpha, because, like, if you guys remember before, where Lydia was trying to put on that concoction to, if you were to break this thing, like, you would get like a very flamed up alpha, but Jackson purposely gave Lydia the wrong concoction, but this time around there is the correct concoction to eventually have these, like, big I want to say, like, test tube things, but they're way bigger than that, chucked at this alpha to all of a sudden have him start to burst into flame. And so eventually Scott is to see that like the Alpha is starting to head to, I guess, Allison, and so Scott goes and like drop kicks the Alpha, and so eventually the Alpha comes back into turning into Peter. And so now we have Derek that is to be on top of Peter's body. And so it seems that Derek is going to want to try and kill off Peter. And Scott is like, wait a minute, like, I thought like I was going to kill off this Alpha so that way I could no longer be a werewolf. And it's like, hey, uh like Derek, if you do this, like you're going to like ruin my chances, and you're basically going to kill me in the whole part of it. And so Derek goes into business for himself and goes and takes his claws and slices the throat of Peter. I would assume that his head should have come clean off to have killed this werewolf, but I guess that just didn't happen. So, which I'm just like, okay, how can we like I guess we can confirm that Derek becoming the Alpha is to just say that that everything is going to like seem that Peter is to be dead, but that doesn't really seem like a real confirmation there. Like I would have liked to have head completely come off of Peter to confirm deaths, because we can't confirm any person's death. Derek could have been dead 8,900 times by now, and we can't, like, we need to confirm deaths here, people. We need to completely and utterly be 100% sure people are dead in this show, and we just don't get the confirmation that I desperately need for Eric, who has been dead 8 million times by now, and we haven't confirmed whether or not he is to be dead. So Derek is now the Alpha, and he is, at the end of this episode, going to, I guess, turn Jackson, which I'm like, okay, I'm a little concerned with Jackson if he's going to be a werewolf person. I'm wondering what Jackson is going to do with him eventually being able to be a werewolf, but I'm also a little concerned about eventually what is to, like, is Jackson eventually going to figure out a way to find out how to turn other people? I don't know. I think there is also, I think we eventually find in some season or another, I think there is a lacrosse team that Scott's team ends up playing against, that they end up finding out that there's like a whole, like, almost like lacrosse team that are all werewolves. I remember that happening in one episode. So it'll be interesting if we eventually find out that some other part of this state or whatever, or town or whichever, we end up finding out that there are other werewolves out there, because that's bound to happen, because since the Alpha is now dead, we have to come up with some other werewolf kind of story to keep this show more interesting. So we'll see how that all plays out. So, really, the episode is to end with us not really knowing if Jackson was to get killed or not, or whether he was going to get turned, or whichever. But Scott and Stiles go to Lydia's hospital room to see how her wounds are healing, and it doesn't really seem like they're healing as quickly as Scott's is, so they're kind of questioning. It's like, okay, what the heck is she? Sheriff Noah was to mention that it seems that Lydia is to have some side effects of whatever had happened to her. It seems like she is consistently going into shock for whatever reason. When Stiles was to talk to Sheriff Noah mentioned that. And so it seems that they're finding out that Lydia is something completely different. Maybe Summer from the OC. We'll find out. She all of a sudden has like really dark brown hair, And it's like, gross. We'll find that out sometime soon. But yeah, so gross. That's what she says usually, or something like that. Anyways, so the very end of this episode 12, and I apologize for how long this took, we really just have both Scott and Allison, who are, because bizarrely we really have, like, Scott is to be this like rooftop guy. I don't know what it is with him. So I was assuming both Allison and Scott were in Allison's bed. Um, but no, like they weren't, because both Chris and his wife, because we actually have Chris's actual wife in this episode. Uh, like we have like Chris's wife talking to Allison and just kind of talking about things, and then we eventually have Chris talking to his wife, just kind of like mentioning how like they're eventually going to be like the pariahs of this town, and how eventually when they put two and two together, that Kate was the one who found this home, that everyone is just going to hate the Argents, and that even Allison is going to get that hate for whatever reason. And so like it's just becoming a more complicated process for these characters to have eventually been outed, that like, hey, they were the ones that started, their part of their family was the one who is to have started this fire. So but yeah, by the end of this episode we just see both Scott and Allison, who are on this roof, who are just kind of like watching the stars, because that's all that freaking matters to them. uh, we also had the moment where like Chris was to talk about him getting handcuffed to the radiator in one of these episodes, I guess to reveal that like Scott was a werewolf to I think Chris, and him talking about him getting handcuffed because of the full moon. And yeah, so I think I covered almost everything, but there was probably a little something that I probably forgot about. That's bound to happen. Like, but I hope I kind of covered everything. I always get that like rebuttal at the end where it's like, hopefully I remembered it all, because that's always a thing. But yeah, I think I hoped I covered everything. Derek is the alpha now, so he has red eyes, and he's gonna bite people. Maybe, hopefully, maybe to replenish the ranks, and we're just gonna see a cluster of new people that are all just gonna be werewolves now, because Derek is like, oh well, this is my like second cousin twice removed that is just now here that I bit, and so now they're a werewolf. Like I'm wondering that all of a sudden like Derek is gonna be opening up shop and just be like biting people so that way they can be werewolves. I'm assuming that's going to happen. And like it was kind of interesting how Jackson was like, hey Derek, bite me because I think I've like proven that I've helped you guys out enough. So yeah, you need to go ahead and bite me now. And so that's when Derek is just like with his face, and then eventually he does the jumping from the top of the stairs to the very bottom. I'm like, so what? Like, is that the thing that Werewolves had to do now? Just like jump the flight of stairs? Like, because Scott did that in the one episode trying to defend Jackson, and now Derek has to do the exact same maneuver that Scott has to do because Jackson is. This is a scene with Jackson, so they have to do the exact same maneuver. Anyways, with that said, yeah, we'll see what happens with all these characters, and we'll see who they end up adding in season two, because that's a normal thing where all of a sudden like the cast gets wider, and maybe there's wider and the like they start to like have all these stories that are going on, and it ends up getting this jumbled mess of like, god, there's too many stories going on, because that's normally bound to happen. So with that said, I'm gonna get the heck out of here because I've talked long enough. Bye everybody. Bye everybody.